Welcome to today's webinar, 10 Ways to a Great Webinar, brought to you by NCSL. All lines have been placed on a listen-only mode to provide favorable sound quality during today's presentation. Occasionally, we suggest all participants click anywhere on the platform to avoid possibly being disconnected. It is now my pleasure to turn the floor over to John Heining. Sir, the floor is yours.
Hi everyone, I'm John Heining. Why don't we, before we get started here, why don't we try using the chat box over here, take a moment to let us know what kinds of webinars you'd like to see in the future. If there's anything that is crossing your mind, these are some examples that we're considering right now. All right, well, it looks like we're covering the bases there, so I'm glad to see that. Welcome to 10 Ways to a Great Webinar. My name is John Heining, and I'll be moderating this webinar today. I'd like to thank the National Conference of State Legislatures and the Legislative Staff Coordinating Committee for making this webinar possible. The Coordinating Committee advises the Executive Committee, also the Governing Board of NCSL, and its key purpose is promoting professional development opportunities like this webinar for legislative staff. I am the chair of the Information Technology, Social Media, Outreach, and E-Learning Subcommittee. You can understand why I'm reading that, of the LSCC. And so I'm particularly interested in these issues here, in doing good webinars and providing excellent distance learning by NCSL. And one of the things that I've noticed over the years is that without exception, the content of the webinars has been excellent. However, with just a couple of thoughts about how to improve the presentation of the webinars, I think we could do much better and have some really compelling, excellent content that we could provide to folks to review. I want to start out by saying real quick, while this is a webinar on how to do webinars, I want to be very clear that I recognize this is not a perfect webinar, and it's not intended to be. And if you identify ways that we can improve it, that's fantastic. And furthermore, if we go through these 10 steps and a couple other things that we're going to be talking about, and you already knew all about this, then please give me a call, because I'd love to have you on as a faculty member for the advanced version of this webinar here. So we're going to start out with kind of talking about our agenda here. We have 10 tips for a successful webinar. We have tools you can use to encourage audience participation. We're going to talk a little bit more about audience participation in just a second. And then we also have NCSL's funding sources with regard to webinars. So it's going to really help you understand, understand how you can fund your webinar and how you can do something for yourself. And then finally, we're going to talk about the timeline for NCSL, about what you need to do and how you need to arrange it so that we can get these things together on a timely basis. We want this presentation to be interactive as possible. Please write your questions to the left. You see that arrow right there in that chat box. And please, if you'd like, I would really love for you to participate in polls, the prompted chats, and the quizzes that we're going to be having in the future here. I'm joined by two other members of the subcommittee who I managed to guilt into participating. I really am thankful for them being here. Lori Christopher from Oregon and Thomas Vaughn from Utah. Wave, guys. Hello. And before we get started, I want to start off with a quick poll. Okay, so what would be most useful in your perception to learn on this webinar? Music for you to think about here. All right. So overwhelmingly, folks are interested in resources available to make webinars interactive. That is fantastic. That's what we're going to be talking a lot about today. So it's going to be very cool. So why don't we move on through here? One thing that I want to make sure that y'all are aware of is that there, I'm sorry. One more poll here. So we want to find out where I am from. I want to see if you're paying attention to the slides as we're going by. And the question is it Paris, Texas, Palestine, Texas, or Pasadena, Texas? And I want to assure you, being from Texas, that is exactly how you pronounce Palestine. All right, and so the correct answer is none of the above. I'm actually from Idaho, as are all of my co-presenters, which is pretty wild. We are all a bunch of Idahoans, so although we all moved to different states. So why don't we get started with the top 10 tips here. And the first and the easiest one, in my opinion, to do here is just use a landline. It's super easy, and well, why don't we take a look at this video here, and we'll kind of talk about where I'm going with this. Oh, okay. So we don't have the video. So of course, this is always, we're talking about, can you hear me now, right? And the guy's walking around, can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Of course, we forget what the reason was for that Verizon commercial was because Verizon was so terrible at the time, and they were talking about how much money they were investing. So you wouldn't drop your calls, and your sound quality would be better if you used Verizon. And so unfortunately, that's exactly the issue. That's exactly what we have to deal with, is that mobile phones are incredibly convenient, but the sound quality and reliability can be questionable. So if you're going to do a webinar, make it easy on yourself, make it easy on everybody else, and just call in, use a landline. The next thing that you might look at here is again, very easy. Just stand. I find a place to do your presentation while you're standing. You will automatically sound confident and more authoritative just by standing. And what's more, a doctor of sociology, Amy Cutting of Harvard, she did wrote a fantastic book called Presence. And she tells us in this book that just by standing, kind of like this here, your Superman, Wonder Woman pose, that you just do that for a minute or so, and you will sound more confident, more authoritative in your interview, in your meeting with your boss, and even in a webinar like this. And that's because of hormonal changes that really actually take place in your body that will make you feel more confident. And so the third element here, again, these are just basic ones here, are practice. Number 3 is practice. It'll make your presentation flow much better. It'll make it much more compelling. One thing that also to consider as well is, don't over-practice. Don't just recite your presentation, because it'll make it a little more difficult to do the element number 4, which we're going to be talking about in just a minute. But before we do that, we're going to participate in another quiz. So what pieces of advice do you have to encourage your speaker to use a landline? So I guess our theme music is over. So one of the things that I really like to do is I just like to call them, when I'm talking to somebody about this and they really want to use a mobile phone, I just tell them, hey, look, I really don't want to have to be calling you up in the middle of our conference there. So please, just use that landline so you're not going to drop off. So we'll move on to number 4, which I was previewing just a minute ago. Oh, I'm sorry, we've got another poll. How many of you practiced before a presentation, and for how long? We need to have the next poll.
I think some people practice in Palestine.
That's right.
Still got the wrong poll.
Yep, wrong poll. Apparently we needed to practice one more time.
Yes, exactly. Well, we'll just move on to the next one here. So the next thing that I want to talk about, and one of the reasons why you don't want to just have a recital of your presentation is, say, you have a technical issue. That's certainly something that can happen. But also, you want to be able to take questions throughout the webinar. A presentation like this should not be just a one-way street. The audience, guys, should be participating as well. That's what helps you learn. And what's more, one of the things that I often see, especially in some of the drier, the more thoughtful presentations that we'll see, is that the subject matter expert is an expert, which of course they are because they're on the webinar, but they'll often make assumptions about what we all understand and kind of jump around without making people aware of their process of logic. And so my point there being is that somebody's going to have a question, and if they're asking a question of you, it's almost certainly because they're not following something. So, make that opportunity available to them so people can ask questions and really help you teach them what's going on. Number 5 is we also like to have a discussion between the speakers. And for example, Lori, don't you think that it's much better to have a discussion between the speakers?
John, I really do. And I really want to mention right now that Wendy Jackson only practices 1 billion times. Now, Wendy, you're going to have to up your game because 1 billion times just isn't going to cut it if you want a professional webinar.
It's got to be 1 billion and one at least, right? Yes, yeah. And Tom, don't you think folks are very curious to know where this discussion is going between us, if it's going anywhere at all?
Yeah, I would think so.
Yeah, see, and that's the thing. I think people are, and it's kind of a cheap way of getting people to pay attention, but almost certainly they are, and that's because of the fact that people like to have, like to listen to conversations. They don't like to just listen to one person drone on and on and on. And something else to think about, I'll just throw this in here, we'll call this 5.5, is that there's really no reason to read a speaker's bio like we're doing today. The presentation is not about the presenter. If they're not qualified to be there, they shouldn't be there. So really, let's talk about the presentation and the quality of the people that are doing the presentation. And so that is also why I'm not going to read the bio for Lori Christopher right now. Go for it.
Great. Thanks, John. I appreciate that. So one of the questions that came up, one of the comments is, Lori isn't standing. Why is that? Well, let me show you why. Now Lori is standing. If Lori is standing, you can't see Lori's face because that's the only way we could work the camera. So there are some instances where you're not going to be able to stand at all times. I do feel empowered, however, John, having just done the Superman pose. Already I feel more confident with the 6 tips that I'm going to present. The first of those tips is relate the content to a personal experience. Make your point by sharing something that happened to you through a story. People are much more likely to remember the point that you're trying to make if you can relate it to a personal experience. So let me give you an example of that. I'm a human resources director for the Oregon Legislature, and if I were to train you with recruiting and tell you that it's much more expensive to replace an employee than to coach an employee, I would give you an example of a recent situation. We had a temporary custodian that we hired from a temp service who did such an outstanding job that after 90 days, we decided to hire him on permanently. And he did such an outstanding job that we promoted him into a trades position. Shortly after promoting him into that trades position, he began to have attendance problems, and he began to have distracted work, and he wasn't doing as well as he had done the prior 12 months. So we had a decision to make. Either we replace that employee or we coach that employee. We chose coaching. The first thing that we did was sit down with the employee to ask what had changed. He had had such a terrific work record with us for the prior 12 to 18 months, and then all of a sudden it just completely fell off. What he shared with us is that his family had recently become homeless. Through no fault of their own, a car had run through their apartment, and so that was a pretty drastic situation. He had to worry about, and in fact, he had just spent, at the time that we talked with him, he had spent the last 3 days in a local city park with 3 little children. And so obviously that completely changed our perspective on his performance. He was trying to get to work. He was trying to do the best job he could, but his hygiene needs were not being met, and certainly his number one concern was his family. Through a lot of intervention from us as the employer, we were able to help him to get into secured housing. We were able to help him with some furniture. And the last thing that we did to get him secured up was everyone came together and bought 6 bags of groceries and paper products and diapers. I delivered those to him, and when I delivered them to him, he said, "Can I just give you a hug?" He gave me a hug with tears in his eyes and said, "You've changed my life." Needless to say, that employee resumed being an exemplary employee because we listened and understood and continue to coach him. And we do continue to coach him in a lot of ways, not just work, but also in his personal life. But he's a valued employee who is once again contributing to the organization, and the cost was zero. And it was the right thing to do. So there's an example of relating a story to you to convey information that you want to convey. The next one is chunking. So we want to talk about, here we are, we're chunking. So oftentimes you've got at least, and usually presenters love the topics that they're talking about. And I could talk about human resources and relate a lot of experiences over the 30 years that I've been working in that industry for way more than an hour. However, John, Tom, and whomever else is listening may not find all of that completely relevant to their situation and may not want to listen to all of it. So if you're able to chunk that up and explain to your audience ahead of time, here we're going to break this into 4 sections. They're going to be 10 to 15 minutes, and here's the individual topics within the larger topic that you can listen to. Then folks can listen to just the part that they're interested in. That may pique their interest. They may want to listen to the rest of the webinar, or at least they're going to get out of the webinar the things that they needed the most. The attention span of an adult learner is somewhere between 10 and 15 minutes. Certainly social media and all of the distractions that we all partake in don't help to extend that attention span. So you may want to think of chunking. How can I take an hour-long presentation and turn it into 4 or 6 chunks so that they're bite-sized pieces that people can digest? Next is
one of the other things that on top of that, and you'll notice at the beginning of our presentation, we also very clearly indicated where the chunks were and where the different pieces were so that people know where they're going as far as that goes.
Exactly. Thanks, John, for adding that. Number 8 is your presentation is a journey. So, yes, and not this journey. Don't stop believing, but that's not the journey we're talking about. We're talking about we're going to take all of you, all 49 of you that are listening to us, we're going to take you on a journey with us. And you don't know where we're going unless we tell you where we're going. So just like when you've got your kids in the car and you're going to some place and you've never been before, what do you hear? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? We're going to tell you. We're going to tell you where you're going. And just as John said at the beginning of the webinar, first we're going to give you 10 tips. Then we're going to talk about resources. We're going to talk about how do you pay for your webinar. And then we're going to give you a timeline. You know where we're going. You know what the journey consists of. So you're going to travel along with us. You're going to feel much more secure and confident. You can sit back and be in the present because you know first you're going to have 10 tips. So sit back, relax, enjoy those 10 tips before we move on to resources. Number 9 is cut the text. You'll notice that our slides have very little text on them, and that's because we want you listening to the person that's talking. We don't want you trying to read the War and Peace text that's on the screen. If there's something that you need to convey to your audience, have that prepared in a handout that will accompany the webinar that you can provide after the webinar. They're going to get a lot more out of having that hard copy or that electronic copy that they can read at their leisure, and that way they can engage with you and listen to what you're trying to tell them. Last but not least, a picture is worth 1,000 words. If you look at the screen now, you'll see all of these pictures, and we all know what those pictures are. They don't need any explanation. So certainly, if you can convey your information and if you can convey your thoughts through one picture on a slide while you're speaking to your audience, do it that way. In closing, before I turn it over to Tom, I just want to say thanks so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. I want to thank all of the NCSL staff who really helped put this together. Certainly Stacy and Angela, we could not have done it without you. You are certainly two of NCL's best, and our experience with all of the NCS staff in helping us help you has been as exemplary as it is this time. So thank you very much, and I'll turn it over to Tom Vaughn.
Thank you, Lori. I think we have a poll first, so let's do that, but it's not the Palestine poll. Which tips have been most useful so far? Okay, I've seen a lot of jockeying for position, but it looks like the chunking one was pretty high, as well as discussion between speakers and taking questions throughout the webinar. So thank you for that input. My name is Thomas Vaughn. I'm with the Utah Legislature, and good morning to all those who live west of the Central Time Zone, and good afternoon to everybody else. As indicated by John, I'm going to spend time talking about the resources that are available through NCSL to us to present webinars. NCSL has a pretty robust webinar platform, and it offers many tools that can help you implement the skills we've learned today. I'm going to talk about some of those and give some examples of some of those. These tools are important to help engage the audience, to help make it interactive, and to help break it up to deal with short attention spans that we all have. We've used some of these tools already today. We've used some polls. We've used some quizzes, audience questions, and we've also got document sharing. There are some documents available to share. If you look at the top of your screen, you can click on those and download them. Or you can do it after the presentation if you would like. There's a lot of benefits to using these tools. As I said before, it helps the presenter connect to their audience, but it also allows you to adapt your presentation, as you might do if you were actually presenting in person. You get a chance to read body language, get response from the audience, and get an idea about how you can address things better. Here's a suggestion. Setting a time limit on the polls will stay open, and warn attendees before they're closing the poll. That's probably a good suggestion in the way that we can improve. And since we have more polls and we're doing the chat, we were able to find that out during the presentation, and so we'll try to do that if we can. This also gives a chance for the audience to weigh in and feel heard. I hope that the person that made that last comment feels that they were heard, because we looked at it. We've talked about using personal experiences. I'm going to use a really short one. I am a scoutmaster of a scout troop of 12 and 13-year-old boys. You can imagine that trying to keep them under control and keep them interested is sometimes a challenge. I often tease them that they have the attention span of a goldfish. It turns out that adults aren't much better, and as Lori already told us, adult attention span is really only about 10 minutes, and I think it gets worse by the year with our reliance on social media. So how do we deal with a presentation that's longer than 10 minutes? Well, we need to re-engage constantly. This is part of chunking, but there's different ways of doing it. Now, I'll also say you can do worse than a 10-minute attention span if you're not careful. We need to do things like not speak in a monotone voice and other things to keep it a little more interesting. So we can do this by using the tools that NCSL makes available to webinar presenters, or even doing some of the things on our own, like providing a worksheet ahead of time that just has small areas where people can fill in the blanks, and they can pay attention to that and fill those in as they go. I'm going to go through now just a summary of some of these tools available and how each of them works. First, polls. They're a useful way to gauge interest and knowledge. They're quick. They provide real-time results to the presenter and the participants. So we're going to do a quick poll. We're going to try to follow the suggestion that was given here. How likely are you to use your polls in your next webinar? Okay, so we've got a few people going here. We'll close the poll in about 5 seconds.
Nice job, Tom. I know exactly when it's closing.
Thank you. And I think that was 5 seconds if my internal clock is on. And so I might toss in a couple, seems to be the big thing, and that's fine. You don't have to use all the tools every time, but I'm glad that you see that it could be useful. Some people love polls and some people hate them, and that's all right. We've all got our preferences. So you certainly wouldn't want to do your whole presentation with polls. You might want some other things. Webcams. Webinars by their nature are rather impersonal. You can fix that using a few things. One is using webcams. I've done a webinar before, but this is the first time I've done one where I'm on screen. It's been a little interesting experience for me, but I think it's been useful. I think it helps us connect with the audience and the audience connect with us. Hopefully you've noticed that we're on here. I tried to see if they could superimpose Brad Pitt's image over me, and they told me no, so you got to deal with me. But that's all right. NCSL's webinar platform will actually support up to 6 presenters via webcam. And so now let's move on to the next thing. There's also Document Share. The Document Share tool allows you to share handouts and other supporting documents during your webinar. You don't have to worry about sharing it ahead of time and people losing it in their inbox, and it can help you avoid putting too many words on a slide.
Tom, if I can just jump in here. Miriam was talking about that, about how difficult it is to get people to knock off putting paragraphs of material on there. And honestly, as an attorney, I can bag on other attorneys that we're usually the worst in this because they really want to talk about it. They've just got a brilliant quote that they want to put on there. And that's what I try and tell people to do is, man, just put your quotes and all that kind of stuff in a separate document and then distribute that with the material, and maybe even have a slide that refers to that quote somewhere in the material.
Yeah, and I have been guilty of that in the past, and it's something that I've been trying to improve on as I've done slideshows, PowerPoints, and webinars lately. So also quizzes. Quizzes are a good way to break up presentations. You can use them to reinforce a concept. You can also use them to find out what the participants have learned or already know. They don't take a lot of time, and they create an opportunity to interact again, so it makes it more personal. Design help. This is really important. NCSL staff is very knowledgeable about adult learning techniques, how to use this webinar platform, and subjects that actually can be presented to the audience. They will help you with this. They're very willing to do. In fact, for today, I would love for you to be all impressed about all this research I put together and time I spent on this webinar, but the fact is I didn't. NCSL's staff did. They conducted the research. They provided us with the information. They produced the slides. They arranged for, operated the webinar and the tools that we've been using, and they wrote the script. All we had to do was review the material, make slight alterations to the script to kind of fit our own style, and we practiced once. Apparently we should have twice, so we had a couple technical difficulties, but live and learn.
I'm impressed that you knew where to go to get the right answers.
There you go. NCSL is always a good source for that. The chat feature, let's talk about that. Oh, excuse me, I skipped one. Survey in advance. This is something else you can do. Don't have to do it for every webinar, but it can be useful if you want to find out in advance what your audience knows or wants to know. This can allow you to do some fine-tuning to your presentation. For example, some of the things that we asked about interest in this poll during in a poll during this presentation, if we had done beforehand, we may have been able to alter our presentation somewhat to more fine-tune that. So that's another option that's available. Chat feature. We've been using the chat. We're going to try to use it again real briefly here. I want you to put what you think either are the upsides or the downsides of doing a chat survey during a webinar presentation. I can think of some ups and some downs. If you will just give you just a short time here to make your comments. Upsides and downsides. Okay, we've got, it can be distracting, I think it can, or disturbing. but you can kind of get the lay of the land. So there's and several other reasons that are flying by here. So you can think about whether for your particular webinar that's a useful feature or not. Again, you don't have to use all of these. They're just options. Again, it provides for interaction. We have this chat box feature, and you can ask questions, you can share comments. Videos is another great way to restart this 10-minute attention span clock, or help the goldfish focus again. I'm just as guilty of, if not more so than most people, of having a short attention span. People learn best visually. The video doesn't even really have to be too much about your presentation, just vaguely related. It just gives a break. Here's an example. Not hearing, never mind.
Go. Yo, I'm all about lead generation. Yeah. Listen close if you need an explanation. Listen up. Sit back, relax, and please be patient. Start soon. Cause I'm watering the seeds of innovation. Yeah. I'm about lead generation. Actionable leads. Listen close if you need an explanation.
Okay, just a short clip of an example of you did a rather creative webinar presentation. Now, like I said, you probably didn't learn much from that webinar little video break, but it did give you something to kind of entertain you for a second and something to move on. It's human nature. We all need it. So they can be very helpful. Also, last couple things to talk about is money. Money always comes up in these things. Well, you'll be glad to know that NCSL has money available to pay for your webinar. And the fact is that there is always, every year, money left over in our budget for webinars because we didn't use it all. The biggest problem I think we've had is finding people that wanted to present them. We're hoping that these presentations will help people feel a little more comfortable and realize that it's not as scary or as cumbersome as it might otherwise be if you didn't have NCSL staff to help you. The average cost of a webinar ranges from $400 to $1,000. We are charged based on phone lines. So if you listen to the webinar via the computer, there's no additional charge. So we're going to do another poll here to see how well, poll/quiz, you were listening. What do you think the potential costs are for a poll? So presenter fee, phone lines, number of computers connected, or the archiving fee. I'll give you 5 more seconds to get where you want to be. This is like watching the voting board on the House floor. Okay, thank you. You were listening very well. Presenter fee, can you pull that back up so that I can read the results? Thank you. So presenter fee usually is not an issue. In rare occasions, we might have a presenter that does charge a fee, but yes, usually it's free. I can assure you I am not being paid to do this. Phone lines, 83%, yeah. If you call in a phone line, you're going to be charged, but by computer lines, you're not. Number of computers connected, actually, with our webinar, no, it doesn't matter. There won't be a fee charged for that. There is a small archiving fee, so that is correct. Thank you. So I want to talk just briefly at the end of my presentation here about a webinar timeline. NCSL has several committees, and one of our committees is the Program Planning Committee. Some of you may have had the opportunity to serve on that. If not, I encourage you to volunteer to do so in the future. I have done that on a number of occasions. The Programming Planning Committee helps decide the content of what happens at conferences, at professional development seminars, and in webinars. In fact, we have a webinar subcommittee. And so if you suggest your ideas to NCSL staff or the webinar subcommittee, they can discuss that. And believe me, we're always looking for great ideas, so you're not going to have much chance of being turned down, I guess is what I'm saying. So about 3 to 6 months out, connect with NCSL staff to let them know what you're thinking, get your idea going. About 3 months out, apply for the e-learning grant. Now, that can sound scary, apply for a grant. It's not. You call up NCSL staff and say, hey, I'd like to do one. Can you make sure that I get some money that would support this? And they'll take care of it all for you. They're really doing the application. 1 to 2 months out, prepare your presentation and the evaluation for the presentation. And when you do a presentation, begin with the end in mind. What do you want your audience to take away from it? What do they want to learn? And then work backwards from there to decide how to accomplish that goal. About 2 weeks to a month out, you want to start practicing. And beforehand, you want to complete a dry run. We did a dry run yesterday. I think it was helpful. And then also you want to have handouts ready that they can download during the presentation. Finally, use NCSL staff as your main resource. It'll save you a lot of work, a lot of time, and from a lot of misery. Thank you very much. I'll turn the time back over to John.
We got a question from Julie Pellegrin who asked if the archived webinar includes the chat stream. Do you know if it does?
I do not know the answer
just answer the question saying that they can send it to participants, but it's not included in the video. But Sabah actually has another question. And but thank you, Tom. Really appreciate it. Fantastic job. And also, Lori, you did a great job. We'll kind of move into a little bit of a question-answer section here of the presentation. So Sabah was asking, is there a benefit to just displaying the presenter currently speaking rather than trying to display all the presenters through the webinar? Interesting. You should ask that. That was our exact plan. Was to freeze the presenters when they're not talking, so we don't have to worry about how we're standing or whatever. But we found out immediately before the presentation started that when you froze the presenter, then the presenter might disappear and you had to reload your browser and all of this stuff. So to be safe, we just kept everybody on while doing that. So yeah, that's actually something that we would have preferred to do. And I will say, that's one of the things that, as you can see from this presentation, it's there's an opportunity for a lot more interaction and a lot more learning to take place because you're having all of these interactive functions. There's also a lot more chance for error. But I think, though, that your audience will appreciate that when they have a little bit more fun watching your webinar, ideally, right? Now, we have another question here. Yeah, okay. So does anybody else have any other questions that they might like to ask here that we can field for you? Or ask the NCSL people to answer later when we don't know?
So, right, John, looks like we've got a question about, if there's going to be something about it in Boston.
NCSL conference here in Boston in August. Yeah, that's something that they're always interested in. So yeah, I'm not sure. I haven't looked at the agenda for Boston with any specificity, but I know that there will be some presentations on how to give better presentations that you should look out for.
They always do a communication track, and that communication track is going to always include presenting because we as legislative employees are called to present various topics at various times in various formats.
Absolutely. All right, are there any other questions? All right, well, thank you very much. I also want to thank Angela Andrews, Jessica. What are your thoughts on sending handouts in advance so audience members don't have to spend the whole time scribbling the content on the slides? Yeah, I agree with you. I'm a big fan of sending them out in advance. What I will also say, though, having been a presenter for these types of presentations and then also having to wrangle presenters for these types of presentations, is that the ability to actually obtain the slides in advance from the presenters can be rather challenging. Kay Warnock, I'd like to apologize to you specifically about that. But yeah, I mean, to the extent that you can provide anything ahead of time that somebody will kind of have an idea of what they're talking about, yes, absolutely. I'm all for that. Let's see here.
Plus, I think it helps prepare them. If they see some of the written materials ahead of time, then they're going to have an opportunity to think about the questions they would have. So I think it's a good idea too, John. I agree with you.
John, I think it sometimes will depend on the nature of the material you're presenting, though, too. In reading about this topic on other occasions, Some people are of the theory that if you provide too much information up front, that people will be looking at that and not listening. So I think you kind of need to balance it and think about what's going to work best for your particular webinar.
That's a really good point, guys. Yeah, that's very good. Let's see. Okay. Well, I don't think we have any more questions, so I am going to thank. I'm going to thank Angela Andrews, Jessica Bream, and Stacy Householder, as well as all the other staff that I didn't personally interact with from NCSL that really made this possible. Tom was absolutely correct with regard to this, that they did the massive amount of share of work for this. This was an idea that the subcommittee was trying to put together for a long time, and without them, we'd be talking about it still. So thank you guys very much. We really appreciate it. Lori and Tom, you have any closing thoughts?
I just wanted to add, if we can do this, anybody can do this, because all of us were so distracted and so involved with our sessions going on. Truly, the heavy lifting was all done by NCSL. And even though there's been some stutters and stammers in our presentation, like John said at the beginning, it's not a perfect presentation, but you're conveying information that's meaningful to the participants. And if we've done that today, then we've met our goal. And so don't you have to be perfect to present a webinar. Just be factual and informative and provide resources for the people who are taking their time to watch. So thanks to everybody, but NCSL, they're the rock stars.
Thank you. Yes, they are.
All right. Thank you all. Have a great afternoon. Have a good weekend.
Goodbye. Thank you. This does conclude today's webinar. We thank you for your participation. You may disconnect your lines at this time and have a great day.